Hey everyone, I'm Rose32F, my husband Trevor34M, and I have been married for 6 years now. Up until recently, I thought we had a pretty solid relationship. We've always prided ourselves on open communication, no holding back, no resentment festering. For the most part, it's worked. We'd talk things out over dinner or on those quiet walks around the neighborhood, and we always found a way to compromise. For context, I work in marketing, and it's been a big part of my life. I started at an entry-level position and slowly climbed my way up. Just before our baby, Lily, came along, I got promoted to a senior role. It's the kind of position I'd been working toward for years, and honestly, I was thrilled. The new responsibilities, managing a bigger team, it's stressful, but it also feels like I'm doing something I'm genuinely good at. It's not just about the paycheck, it's about the sense of accomplishment. Then, about 6 months ago, everything changed. That's when Lily came into our lives. Becoming a mom has been incredible, but it's also a whirlwind. Trevor and I had a plan, kind of. We decided to handle childcare between the two of us, with some help from a part-time nanny a few days a week. It was chaotic at first, as I imagine it is for most new parents, but we found a rhythm. On the days I was at work, I could focus, knowing that Trevor or the nanny had things covered. When I was home, it was all about Lily. I thought we had it all figured out. But then, about a month after Lily was born, Trevor started hinting at things. It was subtle at first. He'd make comments about how lucky we were that I could take time off for maternity leave, how nice it was for Lily to have me around during those early weeks. I didn't think much of it. He'd always been supportive of my career, so I brushed it off as new dad stuff. But as my leave was coming to an end, he brought it up again, this time more directly. We were having coffee one morning, and out of nowhere, he suggested that I think about taking an extended leave from work. He framed it as being good for Lily, how she'd benefit from having her mom around full-time during her first year. He even mentioned how we could adjust our budget, cut down on some expenses, and make it work. I remember feeling caught off guard. It's not like he was demanding it, but it was clear he'd given it some serious thought. I told him that going back to work was important to me, that I needed the balance between work and motherhood to feel like myself. I thought he understood, but the next week he brought it up again, this time during dinner with his parents. He mentioned how great it would be for Lily if I could just focus on being a mom, how a lot of families make that choice. His mom nodded along, sharing her stories of being a stay-at-home parent when Trevor was little. Meanwhile, I just sat there feeling like the conversation had taken a turn without me. I felt blindsided, like suddenly there was this expectation that I should be considering. After dinner, when we were alone, I told Trevor that it wasn't fair to put me on the spot like that. He seemed genuinely surprised that I'd taken it that way. He said he thought it was just an idea worth discussing, not something he was pressuring me into. But the thing is, it didn't feel like just a casual suggestion anymore. It felt like there was a bigger conversation happening, one I hadn't realized we were having. Trevor's argument was simple: his job could support us. He's been working in finance for years and makes a good salary. It's true, financially, we could make it work with just his income. But that wasn't the point for me. I brought up how our combined salaries allowed us to save more for Lily's future, how it gave us a cushion for unexpected expenses, and how it let us maintain a lifestyle we both enjoyed. More than that, I talked about how important my career was to me, not just for the money, but for my sense of independence and identity. From there, things got tense. I could feel this shift between us. He didn't seem to understand why I'd want to keep working when it wasn't a financial necessity, and I couldn't understand why he was so fixated on me staying home when he knew how much I loved my job. It's like we were having the same conversation over and over again, but we were speaking different languages. At one point, I vented to my close friends, trying to make sense of it all. They told me to stand my ground, reminding me that my happiness and career mattered too. It felt good to hear that, but it didn't change the fact that Trevor and I were at a standstill. He eventually suggested that maybe I could consider going part-time instead of quitting altogether. I agreed to think about it, but I made it clear that quitting wasn't an option for me. We decided to revisit the conversation in a few months, hoping that time would help us both gain some clarity. But the awkwardness lingered. Every time I came home from work tired but proud of what I'd accomplished that day, I could see this look on Trevor's face, like he thought I should be somewhere else. And when I'd spend the whole weekend focused on Lily, he'd make little comments about how I should just enjoy these moments more. I don't know if he meant to, but it felt like he was constantly reminding me that, in his mind, I wasn't where I was supposed to be. Eventually, I decided to take my dilemma online, hoping for some outside perspective. That's how I ended up here, sharing our story and wondering if anyone else has been through something similar. I'm not sure where this will go, but I need to find a way through this before it pulls us further apart. Update 1. So, things have escalated since my last post. I thought Trevor and I had agreed to give the whole stay-at-home mom conversation a rest for a while, but apparently he had other plans. It all started one weekend during a late breakfast. We were having a nice brunch at home, pancakes, coffee, the works, when Trevor suddenly brought up the idea again. He mentioned how we could make it work if we cut down on some of the things we spend on, like our date nights or our gym memberships. He had even run the numbers, saying we'd be fine if I didn't go back to work full-time. It caught me completely off guard. I thought we'd tabled this discussion, but he'd been thinking about it the whole time. I told him that I wasn't ready to give up my career just like that, especially since I'd worked so hard to get to where I am. The conversation quickly turned into an argument. I asked him why he kept pushing this when he knew how much my job meant to me. He kept repeating that it wasn't about my job, it was about what would be best for Lily. The whole thing just felt so frustrating, like we were talking in circles. And then, as if on cue, his parents showed up unannounced that afternoon. They'd been planning to swing by and see Lily, but of course the conversation drifted back to me being home with her. His mom mentioned how she'd stayed home with Trevor and his siblings when they were young, talking about all the special moments she'd had with them. His dad chimed in too, saying something about how kids thrive when they have a parent at home. I just sat there, feeling like I was being ganged up on. It was at that moment that I realized Trevor's parents might have been influencing his perspective this whole time. It suddenly made sense why he'd been pushing this so hard. My own family lives out of state, and they're not as involved, so I didn't have anyone in my corner that day. After his parents left, I tried talking to Trevor about how unfair it felt to be pressured like that. I even suggested we see a couples therapist to work through this, but he wasn't on board. He said we didn't need to bring in a stranger to fix our problems. Eventually, we came to a sort of compromise, or at least what I thought was one. I agreed to reduce my work hours temporarily, thinking it might help ease some of the tension between us. Maybe if he saw me spending more time with Lily, he'd back off on the whole quitting idea. But as I started working fewer hours, I realized it wasn't as simple as I'd hoped. Managing my responsibilities with less time was tough, and I could feel the pressure building up at work. My boss hinted that I needed to stay on top of things, even with the reduced schedule. It made me worry that I might be jeopardizing my career just to keep the peace at home. But then, a new twist came out of nowhere. One evening, Trevor came home with this announcement. He'd been talking to his boss about the possibility of us relocating to a smaller town. Apparently, he'd found a place where the living costs were lower, and he thought it would make it easier for me to consider staying home. He framed it like it was this great opportunity for us, a fresh start. I couldn't believe it. He'd made all these plans behind my back without even consulting me. It felt like he was trying to set things up so that I'd have no choice but to quit my job. I confronted him about it, asking why he didn't think to include me in such a big decision. That's when things blew up. He insisted he was just trying to do what was best for Lily, and that he didn't mean to undermine me. But from where I stood, it looked like he was trying to control the whole situation. We had a huge fight that night. I told him that it felt like he wanted me to give up everything I'd worked for, just to fit into this mold of what he thought our family should look like. He argued back, saying that he was only looking out for Lily, and that he thought I'd appreciate having a simpler life without work stressing me out. It felt like he wasn't hearing a word I was saying. That night, I turned back to Reddit, desperate for some outside perspective. I posted an update about everything that had happened since my last post, asking if I was being unreasonable or if Trevor was the one overstepping. The responses came pouring in, and they were all over the place. Some people told me to stand my ground, that I deserved to have a career and shouldn't let anyone pressure me into giving that up. Others said that maybe I should consider Trevor's perspective more, that being home with Lily could be a good thing, and that I might regret missing out on those early years. The mixed feedback just left me more confused. I started second-guessing myself. Was I really putting my career above my family? Was I being stubborn for the sake of it? It didn't help that every time I tried to focus on work, those doubts kept creeping into my mind. But then, something unexpected happened at work. A colleague pulled me aside after a meeting, mentioning that she noticed I seemed stressed. She shared her own experience of balancing work and being a mom, telling me how she struggled too but eventually found a rhythm. It was such a small thing, but hearing her story made me feel like I wasn't completely alone in this. It got me thinking that maybe it was time for a real, honest conversation with Trevor, one where we could lay everything out without all the noise from his parents or the pressure of our past decisions. It wasn't going to be easy, but I knew we couldn't keep going like this. I just didn't know if he'd be willing to meet me halfway. Update 2. After my last update, things took another unexpected turn. I was trying to keep things steady at work with my reduced hours, but it was clear that I was struggling to juggle everything. My boss noticed too, and one afternoon she called me into her office. I braced myself, thinking it might be a warning about my performance, but instead she offered me a promotion if I was willing to return to full-time hours. The promotion would come with a significant pay raise and new responsibilities. It was the kind of opportunity I dreamed about, the next big step in my career. But the timing couldn't have been worse, given all the tension with Trevor at home. I sat there, trying to process what she was saying, while my mind raced with thoughts of what this might mean for us. I asked for some time to think about it, and she gave me a week to decide. That night, I told Trevor about the offer. I had hoped he might see it as a positive thing, a chance for us to be more secure financially. But his reaction was anything but. He looked more upset than I'd ever seen him, like this promotion was some sort of betrayal. He questioned why I'd even consider taking on more work when we were already struggling to balance things as they were. It didn't take long for the conversation to turn heated. And then he dropped an ultimatum I never saw coming. He said that if I accepted the promotion, he'd take it as me choosing my job over our family, and it would put our marriage at risk. I just stood there, stunned. I never thought we'd reach a point where our relationship would be on the line over something like this. I couldn't sleep that night, or the nights that followed. I kept thinking about what he'd said, how everything we built over 6 years could be on the verge of falling apart. I knew I couldn't make a decision under that kind of pressure, so I decided to cover my bases. I discreetly met with a lawyer, just to understand my options if things went south. Not necessarily to start a divorce, but to know where I'd stand with custody, our finances, and all the logistics if it came to that. It was a strange feeling, sitting in that lawyer's office, talking through scenarios I never imagined I'd have to think about. The lawyer was kind but straightforward, laying out what I needed to know. I walked out of that office with a folder of information I hoped I'd never need to use. A few days later, Trevor seemed to realize how much his ultimatum had shaken me. He softened his tone and suggested we put off the decision for a little while, maybe a few weeks. He said he didn't want to rush into anything that might hurt our family. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a glimmer of hope amidst all the chaos. We decided to go on a date night, trying to reconnect like we used to before Lily came along. We went to one of our old favorite restaurants, talked about little things, shared a dessert. For a few hours, it almost felt like the old days, like we were just a couple in love again. But as nice as it was, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were just pushing our real issues under the rug. A few days later, our part-time nanny, who's become like part of the family, noticed I seemed distracted. She asked if everything was okay. It was surprising, but we ended up having a long chat while she watched Lily play in the living room. She told me how important it is to follow my instincts, especially when it comes to big decisions like this. It meant a lot to hear her encouragement, even if she didn't know all the details. That same week, Trevor and I had a late-night conversation after Lily finally fell asleep. He admitted that he's been struggling with the idea of not being the main provider. He said he'd always thought it was his job to take care of us, and seeing me become more successful made him question his role in our family. It was the first time he'd been so open about his own insecurities. It caught me off guard, but it also made me see things from a different perspective. Even with that new understanding, I couldn't make a decision out of fear. I told myself that if I took this promotion, it would be because it was the right choice for me, not because I was afraid of what might happen if I didn't. A close friend of mine, who's seen the ups and downs of our relationship, suggested that maybe Trevor's fear of being overshadowed was what was driving his insistence on me staying home. It made sense, but it didn't make the decision any easier. Finally, Trevor came up with a proposal I didn't expect. He suggested that I take the promotion and that he could go on paternity leave for a while. He thought that maybe if he took on more of Lily's care, he could see firsthand what I'd been balancing all this time. It sounded like a real compromise, a way for us both to step into each other's shoes for a while. So we agreed to give it a try. I'd focus on the new role, take on the promotion, and he'd manage Lily's daily care while he was on leave. It felt like a new arrangement, but I couldn't help wondering if this was just delaying the inevitable conflict. It's hard to know if this is the fresh start we need or just another temporary patch. For now, I've taken the promotion and Trevor is home with Lily. The next few months will show if this experiment will actually bring us closer or if it'll just open up new challenges. I'm holding on to the hope that we'll find our way through this, but the uncertainty is always there, lurking beneath the surface. Update 3. The trial run started with a mix of optimism and tension. Trevor began his paternity leave, diving into full-time caregiving, while I embraced the demands of my new promotion. For the first couple of weeks, we both tried to stay upbeat. I adjusted to longer work hours, trying to keep up with new projects and manage a larger team. It was hectic, but I felt a sense of accomplishment I hadn't felt in a long time. Meanwhile, Trevor took over the daily care of Lily, juggling feedings, nap times, and diaper changes. At first, things seemed manageable, but soon enough, the strain of our role reversal started to show. Trevor hadn't realized just how relentless the day-to-day with a baby could be. He struggled with the never-ending cycle of meals, cleaning up after Lily, and trying to keep her entertained. I'd come home to find him looking exhausted, the house messier than I ever left it. Laundry would pile up, dishes sat in the sink longer than they used to, and little things that used to run smoothly started falling through the cracks. It didn't take long for the tension between us to flare. I tried not to say anything, but I couldn't help noticing how he wasn't keeping up with some of the tasks that I used to manage effortlessly, even when I was still working part-time. I'd step into the kitchen after a long day and see the chaos, wondering how he could struggle so much when he'd expected me to do this without a hitch. It stirred up a kind of resentment in me that I hadn't felt before. One evening, things reached a breaking point. Lily had been fussy all day, and when I got home, she was still crying in Trevor's arms. He looked completely defeated, and after trying everything, he just broke down. He sat on the couch, burying his face in his hands, saying he had no idea how hard it was to be home all day with a baby. It was the first time he'd admitted how much he'd underestimated what I'd been doing all those months. For a moment, we had this rare connection. I sat beside him, holding his hand, and we shared a quiet moment of understanding. But that fragile truce didn't last long. Within a few days, I started noticing Trevor making little comments, things like how I seemed tired and stressed all the time, how I wasn't as present with Lily as I used to be. It wasn't outright criticism, but it stung. Then came the conversations about Lily. Trevor pointed out that she seemed to be more attached to him now. He mentioned that he was the one she reached for when she was upset, and he wondered if I was missing out on her milestones. Hearing that hit me harder than I expected, but I kept my mouth shut, focusing on getting through each workday and trying not to let the guilt eat away at me. A couple of weeks later, my parents came to visit. I thought their presence might lighten things up, but instead, I watched as they bonded more with Trevor than I'd ever seen before. They kept praising him for being such a hands-on dad, going on about how he was doing such a great job with Lily. I tried to join in the conversations, but I felt like an outsider in my own home, like I didn't quite belong in the life that was unfolding around me. The tension spilled over into arguments about how to handle Lily's routines. I preferred having a more structured schedule for her naps and meals, but Trevor had taken a more laid-back approach. It seemed like every little thing turned into a clash, whether she should sleep at a certain time or if we should start introducing more solid foods. It became yet another source of friction between us. Meanwhile, at work, things were starting to slip too. My boss pulled me aside after a team meeting, mentioning that they'd noticed I seemed distracted lately, that the transition into the promotion wasn't as smooth as they'd hoped. It wasn't an outright warning, but it was close enough to make me anxious. I wondered if everything happening at home was starting to affect my performance, and the thought of losing the promotion after all this was unbearable. Then, out of the blue, Trevor got a call from his own boss. They had a promotion waiting for him if he wanted to return to work early, which would mean a significant pay bump. He brought it up over dinner, suggesting that if he went back to work, maybe I could go back to focusing more on Lily. It felt like he was trying to steer us back to his original plan, even though he framed it like it would be good for everyone. That suggestion hit a nerve. During a family dinner in front of my parents, I finally snapped. I accused him of trying to manipulate things, of making choices that always seemed to push me toward leaving my job. My voice cracked as I pointed out that every time I started to find my footing, he'd find a way to make me feel like I was failing as a mother. My parents sat there, stunned, and Trevor's face turned red as he tried to defend himself. After that, things went from tense to downright cold. We started sleeping in separate rooms, using Lily's restless nights as an excuse. But even when she slept soundly, I'd find myself lying awake alone, listening to the silence in the house. The distance between us wasn't just physical anymore. It felt like we were on completely different paths, and I wasn't sure if we could ever get back on the same one. That's when I came back to Reddit, pouring out everything that had happened since my last update. I wrote about the failed compromises, the arguments, and the growing distance. I didn't hold back, wondering if my marriage was beyond saving or if we just needed to find some kind of common ground. The responses have been pouring in, but honestly, I'm not sure if anyone has the answers I'm looking for. I just know that I can't keep pretending everything is fine when it feels like we're falling apart. Update 4. Not long after our last confrontation, Trevor accepted the job offer he had been considering. It meant he would be returning to work earlier than planned, taking on a promotion that required a longer commute. He said it was the best thing for our family, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was about reclaiming a sense of control. With him back at work, our trial run with the new roles fell apart, and a new wave of tension settled in. The first issue that came up was finding daycare for Lily. Now that Trevor wasn't around during the day, we needed full-time childcare. I assumed we'd both agree on looking into daycare centers that fit our combined budget. But during one of our discussions, Trevor threw out another suggestion. Maybe I should reduce my work hours again so that we wouldn't have to rely on daycare. He kept saying that it would be better for Lily if she could spend more time with me. I stood my ground this time, refusing to cut back at work. I reminded him that with both our salaries, we could afford good daycare without sacrificing my career. But it didn't end there. Trevor kept bringing it up, almost like he was trying to wear me down. Every time we toured a daycare, he'd find something wrong with it. A small playground, the teacher-to-child ratio, even the snacks they offered. It felt like he was being overly critical, while I just wanted to find a place that felt right for Lily. We argued about it constantly. He accused me of being too picky, while I saw him as dismissing Lily's needs just to push me back into being the primary caregiver. One night, after another failed daycare visit, things exploded. I was stressed from work, and he was tired from his new commute. We shouted over each other, and that's when he blurted it out. He admitted that he had started to resent my ambition. He said it felt like my job came before everything else, including him and Lily. That admission hit me like a gut punch. I just stood there, stunned, realizing that maybe this wasn't just about Lily or my career. Maybe it was about something deeper between us. The trust we'd built over the years felt like it had shattered right in front of me. I started pulling back, putting up walls around myself. I stopped sharing details about my workday or asking about his. Our conversations became short and functional, limited mostly to Lily's schedule or what groceries we needed. The distance between us grew wider, and it felt like we were living separate lives under the same roof. After a particularly tense week, I suggested couples therapy again. I thought maybe this time he'd be more open to it after everything that had happened. But he brushed it off, insisting that we could handle things on our own if we just talked more. It felt like he was refusing to see how broken things had become, like he was avoiding the hard work it would take to fix us. The stress of everything started to take a toll on me physically. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through all our fights and the things left unsaid. The lack of sleep started giving me migraines, and I couldn't focus during the day. My work began to suffer, and my boss pulled me aside after a meeting to mention that they'd noticed I seemed distracted lately. Hearing that was like a slap in the face. I realized that if I wasn't careful, I could lose everything I'd worked so hard to achieve. Then came the argument that nearly broke us. Trevor suggested we cut back on my retirement contributions so that we could afford a bigger house, hinting that I wouldn't need as much saved if I eventually decided to stay home. That suggestion sent me over the edge. I told him that I wasn't willing to gamble my future, that I wasn't going to risk losing my sense of security. He shot back that I was being selfish, putting my career and my independence above our family. His words hung in the air, cutting deeper than any argument we'd had before. That night, I found myself seriously considering what life might look like if we separated. I couldn't imagine walking away from everything we'd built, but I also couldn't see a future where I kept feeling so trapped. I started quietly researching divorce options online, looking up what I'd need to know about custody and finances. I didn't want to take that step yet, but I needed to understand my options if things continued to spiral. A few days later, Trevor came home looking more subdued than usual. He apologized for his harsh words, saying he was scared of losing our family and that he didn't know how to handle everything that had changed between us. He asked if we could try therapy one last time, but by then, I didn't know if it would make a difference. I could see he was trying, but it felt like we'd gone too far down this road of resentment and hurt. I returned to Reddit, updating everyone about what had happened. I shared my fears, my uncertainty about whether our marriage could be saved, and the apology that felt both genuine and too late. The responses were overwhelmingly supportive, telling me to prioritize my own well-being and not to lose myself trying to hold everything together. Some said that therapy might be worth a try if Trevor was finally willing to put in the effort. Others suggested that sometimes, the best thing you can do for yourself and your child is to walk away from a situation that's become toxic. As I write this, I still don't know what the right answer is. I haven't made any decisions yet, but I know I can't keep pretending that everything is okay. I'm scared for what might come next, but for the first time, I'm allowing myself to imagine a future that puts my happiness and Lily's well-being at the center, even if it means making some hard choices. Update 5. After my last post, I finally agreed to try couples therapy with Trevor. I had my doubts, but with everything on the line, it felt like our last shot. The first few sessions were tense. We sat on opposite sides of the couch, talking through our anger and hurt. The therapist asked questions that neither of us had really faced before, digging into the roots of our conflict. Over time, the deeper issues started to come to the surface. It became clear that Trevor's push for me to stay home was wrapped up in his own insecurities. He admitted that he'd always seen himself as the primary provider, and watching me succeed in my career made him feel like he wasn't needed anymore. He didn't like feeling like he wasn't pulling his weight, especially after the time he spent struggling to care for Lily full-time. It was a side of him I hadn't fully understood before, and hearing him say it out loud changed the way I saw things. On my end, I shared something I'd kept buried for a while. I admitted that I'd always dreamed of climbing the corporate ladder, that being successful in my career wasn't just a job for me. It was a part of who I was. When I felt like he was asking me to give that up, it felt like he was asking me to give up a part of myself. It wasn't just about money or independence, it was about feeling like I had a purpose beyond our home. The therapist suggested a temporary separation, to give us both space to think. It wasn't an easy decision, but we agreed. Trevor moved in with a friend for a few weeks, and I stayed in our house with Lily. It was strange at first, coming home to a quiet place, no arguments, no tension. But during that time, I started to realize how much pressure I'd been putting on myself to hold our family together. I'd been so focused on being the perfect mother, wife, and employee that I hadn't stopped to think about what I really needed. A few days into the separation, Trevor sent me a letter. It was handwritten, a little messy, and it caught me off guard. In the letter, he apologized for trying to control things, admitting he never fully understood how much my career meant to me. He wrote about how he'd taken my ambition for granted, and how he'd been scared of not being enough for our family. It was the most honest he'd been with me in years. Reading that letter gave me a moment of clarity. I realized that I couldn't keep making decisions out of fear. Fear of losing my marriage, fear of Levershin, being a good enough mother. I needed to make a choice that aligned with my values, even if it meant risking the life we'd built together. A week later, Trevor and I met up at a park to talk. It was a sunny afternoon, and we sat on a bench by the lake. For the first time in a long while, we didn't rush through the conversation. We acknowledged the mistakes we'd made, the ways we'd hurt each other, and the parts of ourselves we'd been too afraid to share. It wasn't easy, but it felt like we were finally talking to each other, not at each other. Trevor surprised me with a new idea. He suggested that we try living in the city where my job is based. He thought maybe a fresh start could help us find a new balance. He'd continue working, but we'd hire a full-time nanny to help with Lily, so I wouldn't have to choose between my job and my family. It was a compromise I hadn't expected, but it felt like he was really listening this time. We agreed to give this new arrangement a trial run for 6 months, with the understanding that we'd reassess our relationship after that. I went back to my boss and arranged to work in the office full-time, while Trevor took the lead on finding a new place closer to the city. The nanny we hired seemed great, experienced, warm, and Lily took to her quickly. It felt like for the first time in months, we had a plan that didn't feel like a battle. I updated Reddit again, sharing our plan and my cautious hopes for a fresh start. The responses were encouraging, reminding me that it was okay to take things one step at a time, that rebuilding trust wouldn't happen overnight. I appreciated every comment and piece of advice. It helped me feel less alone in all of this. We kept going to therapy, even after Trevor moved back in. We worked on our communication, and the sessions helped us understand each other's needs better. It wasn't a magical fix, but it was a start. Our families began to come around to our new setup too. Trevor's parents, who had been so vocal before, started to offer their support instead of judgment, and my own family checked in more often, even from a distance. Slowly, Trevor and I began to rebuild our trust. We focused on small things like having breakfast together before work, or taking Lily for a walk on weekends. It wasn't perfect, and we still had our share of disagreements, but it felt like we were finally working as a team instead of against each other. As for me, I found a better balance between my work and personal life. I'd come home from a long day at the office and actually look forward to the time I spent with Lily. Having the nanny helped me be more present, both at work and at home. I didn't feel like I was constantly being pulled in different directions anymore. I know that our marriage will never be perfect. We're both still learning, and there are days when the past comes back to haunt us. But for the first time in a long while, I feel like we have a real chance. I'm stronger now, more certain of what I want for myself and my family. And I know that no matter what happens next, I've made decisions that I can stand by. Thank you to everyone who followed our story and offered advice along the way. Your support helped me through some of the toughest moments of my life, and I'll always be grateful for that. I promise to keep you updated in the future, but for now, I'm holding on to the hope that we're finally on the right path. Here's to new beginnings, whatever they may bring.